Hi everyone, welcome to week 3 of Criminal Justice 201 Policing. I'm Professor Jason Astro, and this week's lesson is Police Organization and Management. Let's get started. This week we will explain various managerial concepts in policing, discuss the organization of police personnel, discuss terms associated with police operations, and finally, describe various police units. Let's get started. Police managerial concepts. One of the first things that you need to know about is this managerial concept known as division of labor. And what that essentially means is who is responsible for which tasks where. And the division of labor is typically represented by an organizational chart. An organizational chart is a breakdown of the organization piece by piece, division by labor. Who is responsible for what where. What you see in front of you right there is a very basic organizational chart of a small police department. At the top, you might have the chief of patrol or the chief of the department, and then underneath that you have who reports to the chief and what are their responsibilities, and who reports to them and their responsibilities, so on and so forth. In small organizations, you would see a small organizational chart, and in large organizations, you would see a very large organizational chart. So a division of labor really depends, or the size of a division of labor really depends on the size of an organization. And essentially it means who is responsible for what, where. So like, for example, in the NYPD, they have the police commissioner. And who reports to the police commissioner? Well, you have the chief of the department who reports to the police commissioner. And who reports to the chief of the department? That would be the chief of patrol, and the chief of operations, and the chief of detectives, and the chief of this, and the chief of that, so on and so forth. And who reports to them? And they all have their units underneath them. Again, division of labor represents who is responsible for what, where. When you think about division of labor, you can think about it in a very similar way to how you think about where you work if you have a job. So, for example, let's say you work at a store, for example, and you are working at the checkout register. You might be responsible to report to the front end supervisor. The front end supervisor is responsible for reporting to, let's say, the manager. The manager is responsible for reporting to the general manager. The general manager to the district manager maybe to the president, so on and so forth. That's a division of labor. Police departments operate the same way. The difference between police departments, though, and many other organizations is police departments are rooted in this military model, what they call the paramilitary model, and there's a strictness about who reports to who and where. All right, so let's move on. And one of the reasons you have that is because of this structure, this unique structure, is because police departments are bureaucracies. And bureaucracies, when you think of bureaucracies, you can think of government organizations or bureaucracies. And in American English, the term bureaucracy and bureaucracies can be a bit of a dirty word. And what I mean by that is often the term bureaucracy will be used to describe like government obstruction or red tape or problems with the government. Sometimes people are referred to who work for the government are referred to as bureaucrats, and that's a bit of a pejorative in the sense that it's like putting somebody down or putting the job down. So bureaucracies in the classical meaning really refer to organizations that are top down. They have a hierarchy. There's a certain structure to them. They're government run. Promotion is supposed to be based off of merit and skill, like the civil service orientation. It relies very, very heavily on rules and regulations. And police organizations, they use a very, very rigid rank structure, similar to the military. I'll give you an example of what I mean when I talk about this idea of bureaucracy, the negative aspect of bureaucracy, not the descriptive part of it, but the negative aspect of it. If you've ever been to the DMV, that's a public organization, Department of Motor Vehicles, and you're going to get a license or an identification, sometimes you have to go and wait on a very long line. And then you're there for, 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, and then you get to the front, and then the person says, "No, you're not on the right line. You have to go onto that line." So then you're all aggravated and annoyed. You're like, "Why couldn't they tell me this before?" And then you go wait on another line, and you get to the front, and the person's like, "No, that's the wrong form. You have to fill out this form." The feeling of aggravation that you get is this idea of red tape, bureaucracy. Nobody's doing their job. Nobody cares. That's what I mean when I say that bureaucracies sometimes have a negative connotation. But when we think about bureaucracies in the sort of traditional sense, the traditional definition, it describes an organization, public organization primarily, top down, relies on merit, skill, top down structure, so on and so forth, rules and regulations. So, although the police organizations are bureaucracies and they reflect the military model to many people, often people look at the police and they equate that with the military for good reason. They're not the same as the military. They're what are known as paramilitary or quasi-military. Either of these terms are acceptable, and what they describe are organizations that are similar to the military but not the same as the military. So paramilitary organizations like police departments, they follow a rank structure. You have to follow orders, wear uniforms. There's this sort of very strict adherence to chain of command, which I'll talk to you about that in just a second. And that's very similar to the military because police departments are modeled after the military. When you think about Robert Peel, and that was sort of the ideal. But they're different from the military in more ways that they are actually similar. And you're trained to maintain law and order, not and enforce the law, right, and serve the public. Your power is limited by applicable law in the U.S. Constitution, and also you have to use a lot of discretion in policing, and it's a very independent application or individual application. And I'll explain to you later in the semester what I mean exactly by that. All right, so paramilitary, quasi-military, either one of these two terms is perfectly acceptable, but they're very important to understand. So this paramilitary, quasi-military model, you have this very strict chain of command, and it relates to this idea of division of labor. So superior subordinate relationship, and that's who reports to whom in this division of labor. At the low end of this division of labor chain of command, you have police officers and detectives, sergeants, lieutenants, and captains. Now, I'm going to express to you something that many of you will find unbelievable, but it's actually true. And the reason that many of you will find it unbelievable is because, what you see in TV and movies and popular media belies this, gives a false impression of what this actually is. And this isn't necessarily true in all police departments, but it is in most. All right, so at the low end of this chain of command are police officers. Makes sense, right? The people who are going out and doing the job every day, actually enforcing the law. And they're also detectives. Detectives have no rank above anybody in police departments. They're the same rank as a police officer. They're in a different title. They have different responsibilities. So police officers and detectives report to sergeants. Sergeants report to lieutenants. Lieutenants report to captains. So in movies and TV shows, often what you'll see is a detective will be at a crime scene. The detective will be at some kind of scene of a major incident, and then the detective, he or she, will start ordering people around. Sergeant, you take your people, go over there. Lieutenant, you take your guys over there. Who's walking all over my crime scene? In the reality, that would never happen. And the reason is because detectives have to follow orders of the sergeant and lieutenants. And that's because of the chain of command. So that's just a little bit of a difference between what you see in TV and actual reality. All right, so span of control refers to the number of subordinates supervised by one individual. And in policing, that's generally 1 to 8. So for every one sergeant, there's eight police officers, detectives that they supervise. It's 1 to 8. Anything more than that is considered, too many people to manage, and any fewer is not optimal. All right, so when we think about the organization of police personnel, you have to realize that police in the United States, and big city police in particular, are part of the civil service system, and that means they have certain job protections, certain rights, right? Certain aspects about their job that are protected by law. And police are generally broken up into two different groups. Group number one would be sworn members, right? And in the NYPD, they call those UMOS. And the other group is unsworn members, members that they call MOS. And the difference is this. So a police department could have 50,000 people, like the NYPD does, and they have 35,000 sworn members and 15,000 unsworn members. Sworn members are individuals who are sworn law enforcement officers. They carry firearms. They can wear uniforms. Sometimes they don't if they're detectives or they're in a plainclothes unit or something. They make arrests, right? They write summonses. They're sworn law enforcement officers. They have law enforcement authority given by the entire state of New York, and they exercise that authority in their geographical area of employment, right? Those are sworn members. Unsworn members are people who are hired by police departments to do a variety of functions. And those functions could be clerical duties like entering information into a computer, taking reports, answering 911 calls. Could even be the janitor, the plumber, a carpenter who works for the police department, the auto mechanic who works for the police department that fixes vehicles. And they also have things like criminologists, right? Criminalistics experts, intelligence analysts, people who work for police departments in these specialized units that are not police officers, but they are unsworn members, but they carry out specific police duties. And in many of those shows that people are very popular, what you're actually seeing are unsworn members, like these sort of like CSI shows and behind the scenes and crime analysis and things like that. Often they're portraying, what you would think of as like a criminal analyst or something, or maybe an intelligence analyst. And those tend to be unsworn members, although sometimes they do have sworn members doing that as well. All right, so unsworn versus sworn. And then we also talked a little bit about this before, but back into this idea of rank structure. Again, detectives and police officers are at the bottom of that rank structure. Many police departments have the rank of corporal. NYPD doesn't have that, but it goes from detective, police officer, then to sergeant. Above sergeant is lieutenant. Above lieutenant is captain. Above captain is can be chiefs, inspectors, depending on the size of the department. One thing that's interesting is that in most police departments, after the rank of captain, it's no longer civil service, meaning you still have civil service protections, but to get promoted is based off of merit and who you know, of course. But it's not based off of exams. All right. Another term, some more important terms that are associated with police operations now. And this is important because as criminal justice and policing students, when you hear talk of policing, it's really important to understand what exactly it is that they're talking about. And if you don't know the language, it's very easy to miss the conversation. So I want you to be well informed, students of policing. So the first thing you need to know is this idea of precinct, right? This term associated with police operations. A precinct is both a physical building as well as a geographical area, and it consists of sectors and beats. Some police jurisdictions call precincts what they call districts, right? In NYPD, they're often referred to as precinct station houses and/or house. Again, a precinct refers to both a geographical area as well as a physical structure where police come and go from that area. They park their cars, they bring people for arrest. Also, you'll hear these terms platoon. A platoon is a 24-hour day is basically broken up into three distinct groups, 3 platoons they call them, and it's more or less it works like this. Like the first platoon goes from midnight to 8 in the morning. The second platoon goes from more or less 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, and then the third platoon is 4 to 12, right? Roughly, they're not exact, but just to keep the time simple. So 3 platoons, and so when in the police department they say first platoon, second platoon, or third platoon. So first platoon again is midnight, second platoon is day, third platoon is afternoons and evenings. A squad is there's typically 3 per platoon, so you could be broken up into different squads. And a tour is just when a police officer is working. So tour and platoon are often used interchangeably, but they're not always exactly the same because the police change their tours all the time for a number of reasons. Okay, now just to give you a visual representation of what I was talking about in terms of this idea of precinct, that's a image of Manhattan, right? Not exact, but just an image of Manhattan. And it's broken up by precinct. So you can see the different numbers there, right? You have 1, 5, 7 at the bottom, 6, 9, 10, 13, right? So that's showing you exactly where the boundaries of the precinct are. And when you're assigned to a precinct as a police officer, your job is to patrol within that precinct. And you're assigned to a specific sector within that precinct. Precincts are made up of sectors. And sectors, they use the phonetic alphabet for sectors like Adam, Boy, Charlie, David, Eddie, Frank. So if I am working in the 2O precinct, what you can see is like about, where rubs up against the Hudson River in Central Park over there in that picture. I'm the 2O sector Adam, Boy, Charlie. That means I'm responsible for sector Adam, Boy, and Charlie. And within sectors, there are beats. And that's like a Robert Peel term, walking the beat on the beat. Beats generally refer to police officers, on foot patrol doing something. So if I'm in the 2O precinct and I make an arrest and I bring them back to the precinct station house, I'll bring them back to the 2O precinct. Okay. All right. Good. So that's important to know. Now we think about these idea about police units. Okay, police units, and I'm just going to talk a little bit, briefly about these. These are what are known as operational units. Operational units. Police units are more or less broken up into two different types. You have operational and administrative. Operational units are the backbone of policing. It's what police are hired to do, right? First thing that you would think police officers have to do is go out and do patrol, right? On foot, in vehicles, answer 911 calls, preventative patrol, respond to emergencies, retroactive investigations, patrol, like the backbone of police. Traffic enforcement, investigations, ESU, SWAT. Throughout the United States, most places specialize policing is referred to as SWAT, which means Special Weapons and Tactics. If you're from New York and you're like, I see ESU, but I don't know what SWAT means. It's because in the NYPD they use the term ESU, which means Emergency Services, but essentially it's the same thing as SWAT. Community affairs, organized crime, harbor patrol, aviation, narcotics. These are just examples of operational units, and these are the men and women who are out in the field, in the street, doing the job every single day, that you see. Conducting investigations, answering 911 calls in the air, in the sea, on horseback, you name it, right? Jumping out of cars, arresting people, which hopefully is not going on as much today as it did, 10, 15 years ago, for a good reason. All right, operational units. The other type of units that you would see in police departments are what they know are known as administrative units, and you could sort of think of these as support units, right? Training, for example, the police academy, budget, crime analysis, police lab, facilities management. Police departments need to be maintained. Right? The physical structures, vehicles need to be maintained. Equipment needs to be maintained. Internal affairs, which conducts internal investigations of police officers and units. Public information, right? Personnel recruitment. These are just some examples of the administrative units that exist within police departments. And they're all designed and all there to support the overall mission of the police department, which really boils down to protecting life and property and operational units, through operational units. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this short little lecture. Your assignments for this particular week, you have a reading here, okay? It's on Blackboard on police organization and management. It's a short reading, but it sort of gives you a little bit more in-depth understanding of this idea of police organization and management, where it comes from. Next, you have a YouTube video, NYPD precinct video tour, which is a nice short walkthrough of what it looks like inside of a police precinct, and it'll show you some of these different units that I've described, operational, administrative, and you can identify them for yourself, right? You have a discussion board assignment this week that's due by Thursday, as usual. However, no response is required this week, all right? No response is required this week. So you may respond, but it's not required. And in addition to that, you have your first reflection assignment is due. Reflection assignment number 1, and that is located, there's 2 ways to get there. First way is through the weekly guide. The other way is directly through the reflection assignment button. So reflection assignment number 1 is due on Sunday, and all the instructions are there. Just be mindful, I'd like to see some high quality work. It's worth 5% of your overall grade, right? So I'm looking for, pretty thoughtful and robust answers, right? And everything you need to know is contained in that folder. All right, I wish you all the very best of luck. I'll see you online for the rest of the week.